Good morning, everybody. All right, we've got an Amarock in today, 2 litre turbo diesel. This vehicle has a lot of history, so it's got a story that follows it all the way from Brisbane down back to here to a local mechanic who's ended up bringing it to us to have a look at. Now, where we're at with this car is a hard start. It will start and run sometimes. Anytime you put load on it, so put it in gear, put the brake on, put it in gear, try and drive, it will just stall out. As far as what I've looked at and what I've done already, first thing I did on it was a software update straight away, just because obviously it's got a long history, so I got no idea if it was tuned, if anyone's done anything. So I put a new factory calibration in there, brought it up to the newest update. Same deal. From there, I started checking all our basics. So fuel pressure, when it cranks, it does make required fuel pressure relatively quickly, a couple of seconds, it's up to spec. It holds spec fuel pressure. Running a clear fuel line up to the feed, it hasn't got any air coming into it. When it starts and stalls, it doesn't drop fuel pressure. Obviously it drops pressure once it stalls out, but the fuel pressure isn't the cause of it stalling out. From there, next checks were basic cam crank signal checks at the PCM. Now the harness was already cut open up here, so that was relatively easy to do. We do have a good camshaft and crankshaft signal. Now, I can't get a known good waveform for this engine variant on this engine code, so I haven't got anything to compare it to timing wise. Now, there was a history of this vehicle. It was at Volkswagen. Volkswagen did a bunch of work on it and ended up saying that it's got a twisted camshaft. Whether or not that's true or not, I'm not sure. It has had all the fuel system done, new injectors, high pressure pump, etc. From there, I wanted to do more mechanical checks or scope checks to confirm engine integrity and mechanical integrity. One thing I know is that it is dumping fuel in when you crank it, because we have an absolute bucket load of white smoke that'll come out of the exhaust. So this is the pre-DPF pressure pipe here. Now the DPF is relatively blocked. It's got about 70 millibar at idle. When it does run in back pressure, that should be under 10, but that isn't enough to cause it to not start and stall. These will still run up to 200-300 millibar. They'll run like crap, but they will run with that kind of back pressure. So that isn't what I'm worried about currently. Now, what I'm looking at here is an intake pressure pulse waveform. I've captured this up here at the airbox because it's a little bit cleaner. I did tee down to a vacuum line down close to the inlet, and it was pretty much the same. It was just a little bit more hashy, whereas this is a cleaner waveform. Now, as you can see, this is not by any means a nice steady pressure waveform at all. I've done a relative compression test, which I'll pull up now. Right, so this is our relative compression test. As you can see, relatively even. There is a slight difference in humps there, but when it does start and run, it does run. So it has got compression. Next to that, this is a crankcase pressure test as well. So in the dipstick tube, as you can see, our crankcase pressure and vacuum is even as well. Relative compression is good. That's why I've moved on to intake. So I'm going to add exhaust and relative compression again, just as a reference into this. So we'll have our 3 channels hooked up, and I'm going to crank this thing over. You'll be able to see the smoke, unburnt fuel getting pumped through, and the waveforms across the scope. Right, so our intake and exhaust pressure pulse waveforms, as we can see, intake on blue, channel 1 here, exhaust channel B. I hooked up a maintainer to capture this, just to give it full cranking speed, because the battery was getting a bit low on the last one. Almost started as well this time around. As we can see, camera to focus, we don't have an even pulse on the intake or the exhaust. We do have an even pulse on a crankcase, so I'm not worried about crankcase pressure. We also have decent relative compression, so that it's important to remember with relative compression, it does not mean engine compression is good, but it's good enough to say that they are close enough across all 4 cylinders that it will run, and it will run once it gets running relatively okay. But we definitely have an issue between our intake and exhaust. Now, if I can get a known good cam crank waveform, which it isn't looking like I'm going to be able to currently, I will be able to confirm timing 100%, but that isn't happening so far. So that'll be interesting to see how we go with that. I'm probably going to leave the video here unless I can get a good known good cam crank waveform, and if we get an update on what ends up happening with the car once I get back to the shop with this stuff, we'll go from there. But I see no reason to blame the ECU. All the harness, everything is good here. We have good fuel pressure, good suction control, valve control. EGR is not sticking open. I've already been over that. It's been blanked to test. It isn't getting stuck open. Our airflow readings are fine. Barometric pressure sensor readings are fine. No immobilizer issues, etc. Everything that it needs to run is there, and it will run. It just seems like a mechanical issue, especially on cold start, because once it is warmed up, it will fire up a lot easier. Interesting enough. Hopefully someone finds that interesting, and if I get more info on this car, I will make another video to update that if we get an update from there as to what happens with it. But we'll get back to the shop with what we've found so far and go from there.